Hi, I'm Kriss, franchise strategist. Today we're going to be talking about some hot topics in my upcoming book called The Insider's Guide to Franchising. Now, this book is really directed at people that are buying franchises, but in reality, people that are selling franchises really need to look at the answers to the questions that are in the book. And before we get started, I just want to share with you that in franchising, the franchisor is only required to really answer 22 questions in disclosure in their franchise disclosure document. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The book is set up with the 400 questions that a prospective franchise buyer should be asking themselves and other franchisees in the system and the franchisor, of course, before they make that buying decision. So my question is there an information gap between the 20 required disclosures or 22 required disclosures and the 400 questions they should ask? Yes. So I'm trying to fill in that gap with this information. So why am I qualified to do this? Well, I've been a franchise developer for about coming up on 30 years. But I've also run franchise companies, so I know from the inside how a franchisor operates, what type of staff they need, how it really works, and what's really going inside the franchise company when they're selling franchises. While I'm on that subject, we're going to be talking about why no one should sell franchises. It should be more like your college admissions process. So we want to select franchises. We don't want to ever have to sell franchises. Okay? So we'll get to some of those points. Now, I've also been involved in the venture capital industry, particularly in angel investing, to get franchisors their initial investment. And this is really why the book's purpose is to create best practices for franchisors, because there's no investor that wants to put money into a company that's not going to succeed. And so that's part of why this is really the crux of the issue, is getting franchisors to understand that they have to be excellent at what they do, particularly if they're going to look for investment. Now, I'm also a certified business incubator manager, and I really feel strongly about this, that a new business needs to look at business incubation strategies, and franchising is part of that, because franchising is really the only exit strategy for any small business. So if you're starting a new business, you really have to look at, besides selling the business, expanding the business, could be multiple units, or franchising it as your exit strategy. And we probably won't cover a lot of that today, but I want you to think about that as a premise of why you need to operate a great franchise company. Okay, so let's get started to the Insider's Guide to Franchising. Now, here are the top issues that we're going to talk about today. Franchisor selection. Remember that the franchise buyer is faced with, what industry do I want to go into? What company do I want to talk to? All those issues. Franchisor obligations, which is really more about what does not legally what is the franchisor required to do, but really morally and ethically. How do they put best practices into their company? Franchisee selection is just as important. How does a franchisor select a franchisee, and why is that important, not just for the success of their system, but why is that important to the success of the franchisee? And of course, franchisor best practices. And I hope we're going to have some great time to spend on that area today, because I think that's the most critical area in franchising today. Okay, so let's talk about the regulatory involvement or the regulatory environment. Most people believe that franchising is highly regulated. In fact, there could be nothing further from the truth. Now, yes, I realize that there are state registration requirements and there's federal disclosure requirements, but guess what it really boils down to? It really boils down to pre-sale disclosures. And really, the only rule about franchising, believe it or not, is once this FDD, or franchise disclosure document, and by the way, we're not going to cover all the legal aspects of the FDD today, but you have to know that every franchisor must deliver this FDD to a prospective franchise buyer 14 calendar days before they can sell them the franchise. So many franchisors are in a panic to get that document in hand so they can start selling them, which is really the totally wrong attitude. But the government looks like, hey, let's protect the consumer from franchisors that are trying to pressure people into buying those franchises. So it's really a good idea, and they get a lot of information about the franchise company. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about how the franchise buyer can utilize that FDD to protect themselves, which is what it's intended for. Now, the only federal requirement, again, is the delivery of this FDD. That's it. But there are 13 registration states, and we call them 14 because there's one requires notification, and they require pre-registration, which means the franchisor has to send the FDD in for approval. But there's only a handful of states, California and New York being the two most recognizable, that really read through it, critique it, make sure that it's up to speed, and in fact they even look at the advertising that the franchisor is doing to make sure it doesn't kind of overreach. And there are a few states that do have territory regulations. Iowa, as an example, requires that the franchisor provide a protected territory. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today. Now, what I'm going to be concerned about is the post-sale regulations. Look at that. There's no post-sale regulations at the federal government level. Now, make sure we're clear on this. The franchisor has to still follow business laws, and legally, they can't defraud people. But I'm saying beyond the normal, civil and business laws, there are no specific regulations about franchising. And so what this means is, you have to be, as a franchise buyer, you have to select the right franchisor because there's no rule against that franchisor going out of business or making unreasonable decisions. So you really have to watch it. Now, there are some states that have some requirements for franchises that are post-sale, but they normally only involve how can a franchise be terminated, how can it be transferred? In other words, you can permit the franchisee to sell their franchise back to the company or to another franchisee, or you can have the franchisor sell to the franchisee. But the idea is they want to create an exit strategy for the small business person, which means they can sell their business and profit from it. They don't lose their business at the time of expiration. And that moves over to renewal. There has to be reasonable renewal terms. In the past, in the long past, some franchisors had their franchisees develop the business and then didn't renew, and then of course they owned the business, and that just was not a fair way to go. But the idea of this and the termination is that the notice of default and the notice to cure. So a franchisor can't just terminate a franchise unilaterally or capriciously. There has to be a reason for it, and generally they have to provide a period of cure, which means, let's say it's 30 days, you have 30 days to fix this particular problem. Some things can't be curable, like bankruptcy, so there's exceptions, but the idea is that you never want to put a franchisee in a position to lose their business over a small infraction. Okay, so that's going to be a lot of the extent of the legal stuff we're talking about today, but I wanted to give you an orientation. Now, what I want to look at right now is system growth. Is this good or is this bad? Okay? But no matter whether it's good or bad, it's a great indicator. So one of the issues, the four system growth variables, you might say, are financial. You have to look at franchisors when you're going to buy a franchise that are well past their break-even point. What does that really mean? Well, in business, of course, break-even point is the point at which the cash flow from operations sustains the business without further capitalization from the people, but in the owners. But in the franchise world, this basically means the franchisor is not surviving alone on the initial franchise fees that the new franchise they're selling are paying in. The business is sustainable. If the business is not properly capitalized, there's no way the franchisor can support franchisees, and their only alternative is to sell more franchises, and it just exacerbates the situation. Okay, the operation. The system has to have enough franchisees operating to achieve operational efficiency, but not so many that the franchise company can't support them. And we're going to talk about franchisor staff a little bit later today. But the idea is that we have to look at their operations to see, do they have the money and the staff to support me, if I'm a franchise buyer, in my business? How about the valuation? If you're buying a franchise, you want to make sure that the value of your franchise is going to go up. And by the way, one advantage of buying a franchise is, very simply, that your business is worth more than if it was an independent business because it has that association with the franchise company. And of course, the franchisor has to allow you to be able to sell to somebody, even though there's approval processes involved. But the point of the valuation here is it going to increase the value of your business? Is the franchisor in that situation to grow at a reasonable pace? Okay, and that's really the key, because the more franchise the system, the more valuable your individual franchise is, provided the system is operating correctly. And of course, the demand. So the continued growth of the franchise system indicates a solid interest in the product or service, the added brand value, and it protects the franchisee's investment. So you have to look at system growth, not just how many franchises they sold over what period of time. Oh my God, this is the hottest franchise going. If they can't support those franchises, then the system is bound to fail. Now, the next thing is the system stability. So you're looking at that. So the four ways to quickly determine that stability is churning. So as an example, in the FDD, under FDD item 20, the list of franchise outlets, you're given all this information. All you really have to do is look at it and see, have there been franchisees defecting from the system? Has the franchisor bought many franchises back? Are there terminations? Are there non-renewals? What is really happening? Okay, and that is called churning. You have to watch that. The research that you're going to do is you have to interview a cross-section of a number of operating franchisees. Now, not the ones the franchisor tells you to go talk to. You can talk to them, but you need to talk to a better cross-section. And remember, in that list of franchise outlets, you're going to have the name, the contact information of every franchisee in the system. Guess what else they have to give you? They have to give you the name and contact information of the people who have left the system. Who do you think you're going to get better information from if you're a franchise buyer? Obviously, you want to talk to, there's always disgruntled people in each thing, but you want to get to the reasonable bottom of why was this person terminated, why did they leave the system, why didn't they renew after putting all that money and time. The other issue with system stability is mutuality in the franchise agreement. Now, we're going to be talking about that as one of the best practices. But the bottom line of mutuality is there's always stacked against the franchisee. That's pretty normal. You know, if you do this, this is your penalty. If you do this, this is your penalty. Well, the franchisor should be subject to the same type of penalty. What if they don't deliver the services they promise or whatever? So you have to look to make sure that it's balanced and you have recourse against everything the franchisor may egregiously do to you. Okay? Now, litigation, you know, we all know what that is. And you basically have, the franchisor has a requirement to disclose litigation under FDD item 3. So you can go look at it and see what litigation is current, what litigation is past, and how was that settled. Guess what though? They have to even report now, because of the recent changes in the franchise rule, they have to even report arbitration. So you're going to sit up, but it's only for a year, so you have to watch what's going on. And you want to talk to franchisees, the existing franchisees, about, have you been threatened to be sued? Have you potentially brought litigation? Is there a class action going on? You got to know what's going on in this way. So those are the 4 areas to determine system stability. Now, just as an example, and anyone can answer this question, if you go and look under item 3, and there are 25 open lawsuits, what do you think the decision should be about that franchise company? Now, conversely, if there's no litigation, provided it's not a brand new franchise, of course, they probably don't have time to get that, but if it's a normal operating franchisor, wouldn't you be more comfortable with a franchisor that doesn't have any litigation on its disclosure form? Of course, right? It's common sense. But people lose their common sense when they get emotionally involved in buying a new business for themselves. And what we're trying to do is slow that process down and make sure that we're not making emotional decisions. I want you to love the business, but you know, we don't want a new franchisee to be taken advantage of. Now, just look right at the bottom of this slide. Think VHS video rental. Would you like to buy a VHS video rental store today? Why not? Well, the technology doesn't exist, right? How about a CD store? They just took it out of the car now, right? So I don't think a CD store is probably a good investment either. But the point is, you have to look at the industry itself. Is it going to survive? Is it going to be replaced by new technology? Is it going to be outdated? Is the customer still going to want it even in bad economic times? As a prospective franchisee, you have to look at this because you have to consider the pace of new technology, the speed of communication, the social media influence. That can destroy a company or it can make a company. And you have to look at the mobility of the population. This is one of the reasons I love mobile franchises, because you can pick them up and move them where you have to go. So that's a consideration in the future for potential franchisees. But what I want you to look at is you have to be concerned about the demand. And we're also going to be talking, we're probably not going to talk about this too much today, but also the supply. What do I mean by that? Do you know there's areas in the world where you're not allowed to harvest, let's say, Philippine mahogany, or maybe it's you know, some type of other non-renewable resource. How about redwood? You can't be a redwood deck builder anymore. So the idea is you have to make sure that the product that the franchise is bringing in, particularly if it's a proprietary product, exclusive product, is sustainable and it's not going to be affected by law. Who knew that they were going to approve marijuana franchises? I couldn't predict that, but I guess you know, that's other times, right? But the idea is, think VHS rental every time you're thinking about, is this company going to survive? The next thing is, what's an ideal franchise out there? Okay, well, there's really 10 ways to look at this, and we're going to cover this quickly, but here's the concept. Transferability in this context really means, can I learn how to operate this business in a short period of time. Now, typically training in franchises is, some of them are 3 days. That's just absolutely ridiculous. But most of them are 2 to 3 weeks, plus a week of time at the job site. Now, that's great for what we call pre-opening training. But you're going to look, as you'll see later, you're going to look for a franchise company that offers ongoing training all the time, because it's impossible to learn that information. But the idea is this something that is just so insurmountable you have to go to school for years and years to learn it? Well, that's not a great franchise. If it's something that they can teach you to do in a short period of time and you can learn it, that's transferability. Differentiated, I guess that really refers to, is this company different than anything that's out there right now, or is it so similar that you're going to get kind of lost in the wash? Okay, I don't know that you want to open up in today's market another yogurt franchise, because who knows how many brands. I think there's hundreds and hundreds of brands right now. Many of them are franchising. You get lost because it's really hard to differentiate what you're doing. Okay, documented really refers to the fact that as you go through the franchise process, and we're going to go specifically through the buying process a little bit later, what you're really looking for is, let me see those documents of yours. I'm not going to take them home, but let me see the operation manual. Okay, now let me give you a rule of thumb. If the operation manual is this thick, I'd be very concerned. You're looking for something that's comprehensive, that it's easy to understand, but it's a reference guide, and that's just one of the documents. The other documents, you want to make sure that they're not boilerplate, and you know what boilerplate is, right? It's just a copy of somebody else's document and don't really make any changes in it, and just kind of standard thing. You want a customized document set that you can refer to, and you want consistency throughout it, including the franchise agreement and the FDD. The franchise agreement is part of the franchise disclosure document. Guess what? A lot of those things are just boilerplate copies, and the franchisor doesn't even understand their own FDD. You have to really watch for that. You have to make sure the language is consistent. You're also going to find out that the franchise manual, a lot of nuances inside the franchise agreements are often put in ancillary documents. You really have to look through the entire document set, which you will receive in the FDD. You have to receive every agreement, but they're not required to give you the manuals and things and marketing plan and business plan. So you want to look at that when you go see the franchisor at their headquarters. Okay, now what is the marketability of this franchise? Okay, and this we'll also consider, this refers to their marketing plan. And what I mean by this is, most franchises in the past have been bought on brand. I like the name of that company, I like the products, they seem to be doing okay. Well, maybe it's okay in their own geographic area, maybe it's good all across. The franchisor should really understand that, but you really have to understand that that's really going to fly in your own local marketplace. And one of the ways you want to know is, what is the franchisor going to give me? Let me see that marketing plan that you're going to give me to tell me what to do from day 1 to day 365 until I am completely oriented. And today, that's everything from advertising, which is really a minimal part of what we're doing now, to social media, which may be a maximum part of what we're doing now. So you want to look at, what is the marketability in my own area, but also what materials am I going to have to market this, and how am I going to differentiate this again from everybody else? What is the adaptability? Okay, and that is this really a company that can expand, or is this product so limited that we're going to find that I may have trouble selling this business afterwards? And what can I change in that business if that's a problem? How flexible is the franchisor without affecting the system itself? And that brings down to number 6, which is systemization. And systemization means when you buy a franchise, you're really buying a system. So if you have to install a product in the field, or fabricate a product, or even make a food product if you buy a restaurant or food service franchise, what are the systems? So let's just take a look at a food service franchise for a second. Let me see the pictures of the finished food. Let me see the ingredient list. Let me see the menu. You really have to investigate this. I'm just using that as an example, but it applies if you had a mobile repair franchise. Where's the tool inventory? How do I use these things? Where do I, so you want to look at what systems do they have in place to, whether it's tracking inventory, whether it's acquiring a new customer, whether it's fabricating a product. They should have developed proprietary systems that have made them become successful more so than other competitors. Now, what is a competitive marketplace? Investors will tell you, if someone tells them there's no competitors to their business, they will never invest in that company. Why? Well, there must not be a demand for it, or there'll be somebody out there doing it. So not only do you have to look at who are the franchise competitors, because you're going to say, well, should I buy franchise A or franchise B? They're essentially selling the same thing. Right? The yogurt franchise as an example, what am I getting for my money? Okay? But also you have to look at it, who are the competitors of my local market? Is the franchisor going to help me discern what's happening there? Okay? Now, sustainability. Now this really refers back to that VHS concept, right? Is how sustainable is the business? And really, what kind of sustainable competitive advantage do I have over everybody else? Is it the proprietary product that I'm selling? Is it the system? Is it the follow-up the franchisor is going to do? Is it the support? What is it? So we have to look at that, okay? Now, the next one is purchasing. And this is an area, particularly where new franchisors really drop the ball. The main reason to buy a franchise is to be a part of an economy of scale. So as an example, where one independent business can buy a widget, a franchise company that represents 50, even 5, or 500, or 35,000. The buying power of that company is far greater than the independent business, even in a cooperative. There's independent cooperatives, but we're kind of just talking generically right now, from independent to franchises. So you want to look at, what does the purchasing department of this franchise company look like? Is there a purchasing department? Do they even understand what that is? Or that's something they're leaving for later, okay? And that's a problem because you want to get the best possible price for the franchisor, particularly if they're selling their own goods. And remember that there's some rules about this, and that's one of those post-sale rules and actually pre-sale rules too. If the product is not proprietary, in other words, it does not belong exclusively to the franchisor, so Kentucky Fried Chicken, Chick-fil-A chicken, that might be distributed by a Cisco or an Alliant and brought to the store, but it's in cold storage and is sent in by the manufacturer that is responsible to the franchisor. No one else can buy that product. But if you're just buying chicken from somebody, you can get chicken from any place. So if the franchisor is selling you chicken at, whatever it is, $2 a pound, and you can buy it on the wholesale market at $1 a pound, the government says they can't force you to buy it that way. So it's only, and that even applies, believe it or not, to the cups, even if they have a logo on them. If your brother-in-law is a printer and they can print the cups cheaper than you can buy it from the franchise system, hey, you know what? You're not required to do it. So what is the moral of that story? If you're a franchisor, you want to give a wholesale advantage if you're selling products to your franchisees, and you also want to give them a logistical advantage. That's why when you see the McDonald's trucks roll up, it's likely that McDonald's franchises are buying everything from McDonald's because it's less expensive, it's on the same truck, it meets all the qualifications, they don't have any issues. Okay, so we're not talking about that very much today, but purchasing is extremely important in the franchise area. Now, what is the most important thing when you have a business? Well, it's the profitability, right? We're all in business to try to return, not just lifestyle, but to try to return on our investment. And one of the issues, as we're going to discover today, is, believe it or not, franchisors are not necessarily compelled, in fact, unless they provide it in their disclosure document, they are not allowed to provide financial performance representations, or what we used to call earnings claims. Now, it seems to be a real disconnect, because if I was buying a franchise, the first question I'd ask is, how much money can I make? I mean, besides loving it and all that sort of thing, the first key question I would ask is, how much money does the average franchise make? What's the gross, what's the net, how does it work? Well, unless there's a disclosure in the document, that FTD, they cannot tell you. They can't wink at you, they can't give you articles, there's all sorts of rules about that. The bottom line is, though, if they do give that information and it's disclosed, then you have a readily available information to see how profitable that franchise company is. Now, they can present the information a number of different ways, but great companies, so as an example, Goddard Preschool, I don't know how many franchises are up to today, I haven't done a recent research, but it's well over 350. They provide the financial information for every franchised outlet. Why is that important? Well, they're not selectively picking out the most profitable ones and putting them up there. You can see everything that's going on. Okay? So they're very, very transparent. That's what you're looking for. If they do not give earnings claims, and unfortunately, even though the pendulum is swinging back because it's best practices to give earnings claims, it's still about 70% of franchisors do not report these financial performance issues. So now you are stuck with going to talk to existing franchisees about how profitable are you. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But number 10 may be one of the most important things that you have to look at for an ideal franchise. How profitable are they? Now, every franchise is not the same. So I have conveniently divided this up for you into several areas. So let's take a look at them. So we have the venerable brands. These are people with 5,000 units or more. And of course, I don't ever pick on McDonald's. I think they have the greatest system, regardless of what you feel about their food or what they do. They're the greatest systemized organization, and they also have created more millionaires than any other business in the country. So I have to respect what they're doing. Now, generally, they're going to be, and I want to differentiate this for you. There's entrepreneur level. That means you're doing everything by the seat of your pants and you're operating your own little business. And there's enterprise level, and that generally refers to how a public company is run. So I want you to understand that a franchise company is essentially like a public company. In fact, little tip here. Only filing one piece of paper with the SEC would allow a franchise company to go public. It's normally not done that way, but because franchise companies have audited financials from day number one, they're an easy acquisition target, and they're also an easy company to go public, because everything is transparent. And why that's important to you is you're going to see those franchisor or prospective franchisee is going to see those financials inside the FDD. So yes, I'll just talk about this now quickly in case I don't cover it later. If I see that there is $1.5 million on the balance sheet, or $10 million on the balance sheet, or $100 million on the balance sheet, I can be reasonably assured that that franchise is going to be able to support me. If I see $25,000 on that balance sheet, I don't think I'm going to buy a franchise from that company. So the information is there for you. Okay, now let's get back to our growth stage. So it's almost impossible for the average person, unless they're an investor, consortium, or a group or syndicate, to really buy a venerable brand today. Now, the good news is they're financeable, they're investable, but even McDonald's right now doesn't really sell franchises in the United States because they're basically sold out. Now, they are selling off some of their company-owned stores. I want you to think about that for a minute. Why would a company sell off their company-owned stores to make them franchises? Well, then franchising is pretty profitable if they're doing that, right? Less aggravation, less issues. But the point is, that's generally off limits, right? So let's move down to national brands. A lot of national brands that have come out with more than 1,000 units, they generally are thinking about going international, having a national presence. They have brand recognition. They're financeable through the bank. If you were qualified to do that and you can handle that, great. Okay, that's a great opportunity. Now, established brands. This may be another way to get in. They have a steadily growing market share, but again, they're a proven commodity. They understand what's going on. It's a great company to be involved with. But most franchise buyers today, in fact, you probably will not see the top tier companies even in a franchise show. They have to select you, or you have to be recommended, and there's a number of ways that you can do that. But most people are going to be looking at emerging concepts, which are 50 units. Now, primarily, they are entrepreneurial management with a focused vision. So the entrepreneurs that are involved are learning, they're moving up to professional management to become an enterprise level company. Hopefully they're well underway. They're usually SBA financeable, so there's a lot of things. There are few or no multi-unit operators, but they're moving toward that. Multi-unit operator is a person that uses has one or more franchises. They're fast growing, but they're not necessarily a critical mass because they're only at 50 of them. They're past break even, but they don't have those economies of scale. But here's what most people think about. They really think about hot concepts because they read it in Entrepreneur Magazine. What should I buy? Well, again, they're usually entrepreneurial concepts with some vision developing for what is this really going to be and what am I going to do. They really have fast growth, but they usually lack stability. So you have to test the waters there because they're selling franchise, but they're not necessarily having a lot of franchise services. So one of the things I look at that is how much money do they have in the bank and how much staff do they have. And then we have to move down to startup concepts. And we're going to talk about this next, but these are 0 to 25 units. Should you buy a franchise from somebody that's never sold a franchise before? Well, don't say no yet, because it might be maybe, okay? But here's what happens. These are entrepreneurs that are just saying, I have this great idea, I'm going to franchise my concept, but they don't really have any brand recognition, they're not really financeable. So we have to look into best practices of franchisors, because there's a lot of great ideas out there, and this is where the new franchisee can benefit from particularly from negotiation and from maybe getting involved with the franchise company themselves. So I want you to think about that for a minute. Now, let's talk about startup franchisors more. Okay, now so what does this mean? Well, let's take a look at, okay, an average of 200 new brands appear on the market every year. You have a lot to sift through if you're a franchise buyer, and they normally end up at the franchise shows. But here's the problem. 50% of them go out of business by year 3 because they don't follow best practices or really understand organizational excellence. And we'll cover what that is. Now, provided the operation meets a reasonable standard, okay, you can consider There's no reason to avoid it. You can consider a startup franchisor. But you want to look at what is the opportunity that offers the greatest opportunity for success. And who's going to negotiate with you? Because if you're the first franchisee in, they're building their business on you. Remember I just talked about if I'm going to buy a franchise, I need to talk to existing franchisees? What if you're the only existing franchisee? You're going to be spending more time talking to new franchisees than you are on your own business. So you really have to strike up a reasonable relationship with your franchisor. Now, I want you to understand something else. A franchisor, by law, is not required to operate the franchise business itself. They don't even have to have an operating prototype. So if you're the first franchisee, and who do you think is the operating prototype? It's you. So you better negotiate better terms. So here's what you look for when you're thinking about a startup franchise. And that is, are they making financial performance disclosures? Look at that. If they're not, you better get to their business plan pretty fast. What is the financial condition? And what is the financing availability? We're going to talk more specifically about that, but they're all disclosed in the FDD, so there's no secrets. So don't necessarily steer away from startup franchises, but you have to be even more vigilant. Now, how do you compare a franchise offering? Well, there's basically 15 ways that you do this, and we don't have to cover every one, but let's just kind of read down. Obviously, you want to look at their products and services. You know, are they great? Are they, competitive? When were they founded, and when do they begin franchising? So what is it starting to tell you? If I'm a new franchise buyer, I need to create a spreadsheet, and I need to look at every one of these variables as I go through. Now, most of this is reported on the top directory sites, and franchisors usually let you know about this in advance of the giving you the FDD. So this is kind of public information. So you want to look at all this information. So what are we really talking about now? We're talking about there is a systematic way to determine which franchise is best. Okay? Now, part of this, let's cover a couple of these. I want to talk about total investment, because this is a misnomer. The franchise law only requires franchisors to disclose what is the pre-sale financial requirement. So what does it cost to get this open? What does it cost to buy the vehicles? What does it cost to open up the restaurant, or whatever it may be? There's no requirement for them to tell you what it's going to cost afterwards. What's afterwards? All your working capital, your training of your people, whatever it may be, you have to make sure you have enough money in reserve to be able to do this. So the reason they're not telling you is because if one franchisor tells you that their investment is $100,000 because they're narrowly following the rule, and another franchisor says for the same concept it's $200,000 because we're trying to be more realistic about your working capital needs and so forth, unfortunately it's human nature to say, well, geez, I'm going to go with the $100,000 because it's less. And what they find out is, I really need to double the money. So you really want to investigate that. What's the best way to find that out? Well, very simple. You ask the existing franchisee, was the estimate of your total cost to get open and the money that you needed accurate, or did you have to go back to your father-in-law and get more money? Think about that one. Okay, now, what are the financial requirements? Do they have any? You know, what does your personal net worth have to be? How does it work? There's no sense even applying to a company that you don't meet the financial requirements for. Okay? What are the percentage of franchises owning more than one unit? Because probably if you want to expand your business, you want to own more than one unit. You want to know what's going on there. How many employees do I need? If you're afraid of employees, you may want to get a franchise that doesn't have any. Is absentee ownership allowed? Are you an investor and you're going to put a manager in place, or do you have to be there? So these are things normally that are there. It's very unusual to see any franchises offering financing, but we're going to talk about that. And what kind of support do they offer beyond the 2 weeks of training and so forth? What's the ongoing support? Why is that important? Well, remember, you're paying an initial franchise fee to cover getting into the franchise and buying the license, but you're going to be paying a royalty every month, and what are you getting back for your money? Okay, so we're going to talk more about that later. What does franchise ranking history mean? Well, the Entrepreneur Magazine and many other sources rank franchises by different ways. Some of it's just advertising hype. You don't have to pay attention to that, but it's something certainly worthwhile to take a look at. Sometimes the accolades are good. Now, we're moving into franchisor obligations right now. And the first one is you need to look into, or a franchise buyer needs to look into, the franchisor operation, okay? Because you're buying it to gain a significant advantage, or a sustainable competitive advantage in the marketplace. That's why you're buying the franchise. Are you getting that? Okay, is the operation geared to sell franchises or support franchises? There has to be a balance, okay? Because the franchisees may not be receiving the full value for the money that they're paying in. Successful franchises are properly staffed, highly organized, They are well financed, and they have the capability of providing this support. So I want you to take a look at that. Now, why do they need the money? Well, most people don't realize that if they have a patented process or a patented product, or they have a trademark, now everyone knows that the whole thing about a franchise company revolves around the trademark, isn't that true? Okay, and you have to have a federally registered trademark. That's one of the tenets of becoming a franchisor, and how franchisors opt out of state business opportunity laws. So every franchisor will likely have a federally registered trademark. Now here's the problem. When you have a patent or you have a trademark, you are legally required to defend that. So if there's any infringement, the franchisor must have enough resources to defend it, or your trademark as a franchisee will be worthless. And this is something to really understand. And that applies to trademarks, domain names, patents, trade dress. Does everyone know what trade dress is? Well, if I took all the signs down to McDonald's, could you still tell it's a McDonald's? Or if I took all the signs down to Buffalo Wild Wings, can you tell it's a Buffalo Wild Wings? Right. Because of the trade dress. So once you know that, you're understand that that's also a protected part of the franchise. And of course, they may have some proprietary products, and we'll talk about that too. But the idea is, we need to see what their operations look like, and not just buying the name. Okay? Now, that talks about franchisor staff. Now, this slide would make any startup, or all the way through that up into probably the third level, like emerging concepts, it would make them cringe. Because, my God, are you telling me I need that many staff members? Well, typically, a startup franchisor should be between 5 to 10 staff members. In year 2 to 3, as you start to sell more franchises, it basically tops out around 30 people in the seats to be able to support a reasonable franchise operation. It does grow, but the advantage to a franchisor is, after they get to that kind of point, they're only adding a few staff members. As the system grows exponentially, they're only adding incrementally, and that's where the franchisor's money is made after a break-even point. Now, that does not include the field staff, because there's a ratio of franchisees to field staff. That's the person, the field representative, is going to come out and inspect the franchise and support the franchise. And you know what? I should have said, I had to say inspect because we're going to check. But we don't want a bunch of inspectors out there. We want a bunch of consultants who are going to help the franchisee improve their business. Does that make sense? We're not there to punish them. We're there to make the system work better. But the point is that you want to look at that ratio. So if you have 50 franchises and there's one field representative, you're not going to get much service. So you're going to look for a lower ratio. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20, depending on how complex the business is. But you want to make sure you have a reasonable ratio. So I usually say the average 15 to 1. But let's run down here just quickly. There's obviously going to be administration, because certainly the original entrepreneurs are going to appoint themselves as, the founders are going to appoint themselves probably as CEO or CFO or COO. So you want to stay away from that one. They really need professional management so they're fully trained. Operational management is that COO, the marketing director, the training director, the field director. You want to make sure they really know what they're doing, and normally they're recruited from other successful franchise companies. Usually the administrative team is going to have some assistants, certainly reception or certainly an administrative assistant. The franchisor is probably not going to have a call center the first week, but you want to look for that, because you're not the only one calling in for support. Your customers are calling in if there's an issue or there's a support problem. You want to make sure there's somebody there. You notice on group 5, data entry and billing, well, that has to be there because that's how the franchisee is going to be able to sustain themselves. They want to make sure you're paying your royalty and other things are happening, so they have to have that. I didn't call it a sales process, but I let the word sales slip in. I'm calling this the admissions department. It's really the sales manager and sales representatives. But again, they shouldn't be selling you anything. They should be kind of putting you through that college admissions process, we'll call it, right? Now, one of the main people you're looking for is the trainer. So what am I really saying here? If the president of the company, the founder, is also the administrative assistant, is also the field director, is also the marketing person, the head of PR, and the head of training, don't buy that franchise, okay? The person can't possibly wear all those hats, okay? Now, if you have a restaurant or some other type of franchise that requires a physical location that's publicly accessible, there really should have an opening team, because you're not a contractor, you're not an architect. You want to make sure that there's a team out there to help you select the property and get the business up and running, and that is really the responsibility of the unit opening team. Now, if if possible, if you're selling a service or a product that really can go nationwide from different companies. Let's say you're selling something to, well, use McDonald's again. Let's say you're simply to sell McDonald's. Well, McDonald's is all over the country. So when you open franchisees in California, and they can also sell at McDonald's, well, how are you supposed to get to McDonald's? The franchisor should have a national sales team to make those introductions and those sales. Now, it doesn't apply to every franchise, so this is flexible. This is kind of a generalization, but you have to know that. And again, if you have product distribution, well, is there a warehouse? Are they fabricating? What are they doing? If there's no product, then that doesn't apply. And of course, we already talked about field representatives. So what does this really mean? Just multiply it out, guys. If you have 5 people, and let's say they're making $50,000, or let's make it easy on me, 10 people and $50,000, that's $500,000 just in salary. Does the franchisor have that kind of money to be able to support those folks? That's why they don't hire staff. That's why they're not supporting franchisees. So they really need investment money first, not to develop the franchise company. That's a little bit of it, okay? They need working capital in place to be able to support franchisees and also to sell franchisees, market them, go to shows. It's pretty expensive, all the travel, before they reach their break-even point, when cash flow is sufficient to support operations. No more capital has to be taken out of the pot, right? So, but they have to start out with some capital there. So let's look at it. Now, how much training should you expect? Well, we talked about this a little bit, but you know, you need training in 7 specific areas. Okay, so the idea is that you need business administration training if you're not already an entrepreneur. You need business operations training. How are you supposed to get the product center? How does it work? Technical operations. How do I build the product? How do I cook the food? Traditional marketing is, do I advertise, or is that not going to be effective for me? Internet marketing, or we'll call that, you know, not traditional marketing, that is critical today. If the franchisor does not know about that, how to get a top rating in Google Plus or get you on the top of Google pages by SEO, then you know what? That's a problem. Okay? Sales, how is it sold? You need that training. Most people say, I'm not a salesperson. Hopefully the product will sell itself, so to speak, but you still have to understand how to handle customers and their objections and how to lead them to make a good decision. It's your responsibility. And most important today is customer service. You need training in customer service if you're not used to dealing with the public. So my issue is, how are you really supposed to learn that in 3 days? You can't. In 2 weeks, you can't. And you know, 3 weeks, well, it's just starting to help. And 1 week on the job, that's fine. But you know, what happens if you can't successfully complete training? Well, one of the issues has to be, when you look in your franchise agreement, if you can't successfully complete the initial training, you need to opt out, and you should get your money back. The franchise should be glad to get rid of you and give your money back. So these are, as an example, some issues that you need to look at before, or franchise buyer needs to look at before they buy, because you want to make sure you're not stuck. And I have, unfortunately, had many of those cases come to my desk where the people say, I'm just keeping your money and that's it. And so it's pretty unfair, because it depends on how they design their training. But the idea is, you want to be able to opt out if you can't make it. But I'm expecting most franchise folks to make it, because the selection should have been well, they physically fit. Now, I'm concerned about pre-opening training, but how many lectures have you, and please don't count this one, how many lectures have you sat through and you leave? It's just human nature. We don't absorb everything that we hear. We do absorb more visually and in reading, but the idea is you're not going to learn 100% of what's being said, but you need 100% because it's all being crammed into those 3 weeks. So really what happens, you have to get the gist of what the business is. It's usually the franchisee and their designated manager. But I'm going to suggest that the franchisor should take responsibility to also train your staff. It should be an extra expense because it's not free, but it should be there, and particularly if they have to be certified in the way the franchisor operates the business. Now, here's the reality. Most training is going to be after you get on the job, and so we call it post-opening training. And most people are going to say, I need more training because the retention of the information, I wasn't there. So what are you going to do for me, Mr. Franchisor? More training is wanted. I want more training because I want to be successful in my business, right? And that's part of it. And is it going to be intranet? Is it going to be webinars? Is it going to be in person? Do I have to fly? Is it the field support person? The idea is you have to find out, okay? And I'm going to benefit from more training because it's very specific to the franchise company. So the idea is you have to look for this in the FDD, or you have to negotiate this with the franchisor because you want to make sure that you're getting the training that you need. Okay? Now, how can franchise success be defined? Okay? No franchisee buying a company can be assured that they're not going to lose money. We understand that. And the SBA reveals that, man, there's a lot of failures because they're not really being selected properly. So part of this is you have to be able to have the franchisor provide excellence in every area, and you have to be able to adopt that or adapt to that and bring that back to your own business. So what you're trying to do is buy a franchise company from a company that's going to eliminate most of the issues that you would have run into if you were an independent business. So just think about that, of what that obligation is to the franchisee. But there's no guarantee. Now, what could a guarantee be, by the way? Well, the franchisor can say, I'll guarantee to buy your business back if you don't like it or you're not up to par, because you're really my partner and a representation of me, even though you're independent. I don't want you out there if you're not going to do a good job. But most franchisors don't have the money to do that, or the willpower to do that, or the guts to do that, okay? Because they usually have selected poorly, okay? So if you knew you had to buy the franchise back from somebody, or you knew you had to finance for somebody, would you select better? Yes, you would, okay? Now, let's take a look at franchisee return on investment, okay? Now, surprisingly, a lot of franchises are purchased for lifestyle. I just want my own business. I'm tired of answering to the boss. Of course, they don't realize they're going to work more hours, but that's a whole other story. The idea is they're not necessarily doing it to generate wealth. Yes, they want to sustain their company, they want to sustain their family, and they sustain their company and put some away for retirement. But most of them are really there for the lifestyle change and not having to answer to somebody. So here's what has to happen. The franchise buyer has to determine what level of return on investment am I interested in, okay? Am I happy with a $45,000 a year salary and $20,000 in profit after all expenses? Or am I looking more for $100,000, or am I looking more for $150,000 or more? And if you're looking for more than that, okay, like so your salary, everyone knows what a dividend is, right? When the company pays out from their profits. Any bonuses that you might receive for doing a great job, or commissions, or what is the business valuation going to be next, and how much am I going to make when I sell this business in 5 years? Those are the four factors that have to be considered. But most importantly, am I happy with the overall return? Can I support my family in the lifestyle that I'm accustomed to or wish to become accustomed to? And am I happy, or am I going to be complaining all the time? So you have to know what the franchise is going to make in order for you to make that decision. Okay, now, franchisor obligations. So what happens if a franchisor can't meet its obligations? Now, we talked about this a little bit in that mutuality issue. You have to make sure the franchisor has in writing what's going to happen if, as an example, they fail to provide services. Does that mean they're going to reduce the royalty payment? How about if their operations cease? Does that mean you have to cease your operations, or does that mean you can continue to run your business and use the same trademark without obligations to pay royalties to them, of course, or maybe there's a licensing fee to use the name? And that's a serious issue. And a routine issue would be, you want a new supplier, and the franchisor is dragging their feet. Well, at some point, maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 45 days, there needs to be automatic approval. Advertising requirements. If you're required to submit your advertising for approval and they won't do it, okay, or they're going past 30 days and you really want to get this advertising in, well, guess what? You need to have that kind of issue resolved in the franchise agreement. So let's make sure that happens. Now, franchisee selection. Let's look at this from two perspectives. From the franchise seller's perspective, there's really a 7-part qualification. And I think you'll understand what this is. What is the proficiency? So we call it PLEASED, right? A little acronym. So proficiency, is this person really good? Do you think they're going to be good at what they're going to be doing in the franchise company? How's their leadership? What kind of educational background do they have? What kind of attributes do they have? What kind of skills, experience, and determination do they have? So the franchisee can use this profile to look at, well, what does the franchisor want in a franchisee? And do I meet those qualifications? Should I even bother to prepare? Franchise buyer's perspective is, prior to making an application, I'm going to do a self-assessment, and I'm going to look at my personal profile, like I just said. I'm doing a self-examination. So the franchisor examining you, and they're doing those 7 areas. So if you know what those 7 areas are, get the profile and find out if you meet them before you even apply for a particular franchise company. Okay? So as an example, if you were going to buy a computer programming company and you needed Microsoft certification before you could do it, well, you might want to do that first before you apply for the franchise. Or if you know you're not going to be able to understand that, why are you buying that type of franchise, right? So you have to think about those 7 areas, okay? Now, What is your purchase process? And of course, the franchisor's process mimics this, and I've indicated that a little bit in the parentheses. So just let's go through this quickly. You really have an obligation outside of even the franchisor of getting an education about franchising, and that's kind of part of what my book is about. Hey, here's what you need to know, right? Okay. You need to understand how to assess franchise companies, and you have to understand how to select franchise companies that you're going to apply to. And once you decide who they are, there's a system for this, okay? Once you decide who they are, you want to pre-qualify, right? And so you're going to send in your basic qualifications, probably on their website. You're going to get a follow-up call, and you're going to discuss it, and you're going to get an initial reaction. Do I really like this or not? If you like it and they like you, they'll send you an application, or they'll allow you to go to their application process online. And then after they receive it, and they kind of say, yeah, you're the type of person we're going to look for, they will let you review the FDD. They'll send you the FDD. So there's no point in time anymore. There's no trigger of when the franchisor has to deliver the FDD, as long as it's 14 calendar days before they sell you a franchise. So normally now, a good franchisor is going to hold that information back because it's very, very confusing. You don't really want it out there. It could be 400 pages of information. There's no sense of providing that to people that aren't going to buy a franchise or qualify. Now, after you review the FDD, they're going to call you and you're going to discuss it because they get a chance to read it first and you're going to have questions. So they're going to discuss it. It's very likely if you say, yeah, I kind of like this, let's move ahead, they're going to provide some sort of testing for you. The franchisor is going to pay for it. You're really paying for it in your initial franchise fee, but the idea is you're going to be tested, whether that's a DISC personality test or whether it's more specific to the franchise. It could be anything. I want you to understand what Discovery Day is. Discovery Day is when a group of prospective franchisees goes to franchisor headquarters and they kind of are given a show about what the franchise company is all about. And usually they'll stay for a few days, maybe go talk to some franchisees in the area, or stay for the office interview, which is really the next thing. 11, we're going to talk about a little more in depth. The franchisor will tell you that there is no negotiation of the franchise agreement. And that may be true at the McDonald's level. But other than that, it's an agreement, it's a purchase that can be negotiated, right? It's an offer and acceptance issue. So don't let that intimidate you. Then, of course, there's headquarter training. And the reason I put award after headquarter training is that last slide, right? You shouldn't be awarded a franchise if you can't pass headquarter training. And so they can unravel it. And then, of course, there's planning, business planning, and marketing planning, and financing. Because if you can't get the financing, you're not going to be able to buy the franchise. And then, of course, you're going to receive, and the franchisor is going to deliver, both pre-opening and opening services. Okay, so that there is a process to it. Okay, now we talked about this, so I'm going to skip over this slide a little bit. But take a read over it. Remember what this is about. The franchisor is not necessarily required to give you down to the penny every amount of money you're going to have to spend to get this business operating. They have to tell you the reasonable costs of getting the business open. That is not the total cost. So you have to be cautious about this, so take a look at that. Okay. Now, let's go back to negotiations real fast. Well, I can negotiate. That's great, Fred. Thank you for letting me know. What do I negotiate? Okay, well, this is only a partial list, but I'll just go over this quickly. Particularly with startup franchisors and the ones that are lower on the list of the progression list, fewer franchises and less experience, they're going to be more open to negotiation from you. And what you want to negotiate is obviously a great location, and the fact that if that location does not work out, you're able to relocate. Okay? What happens if a freeway comes and bypasses you and now you have to relocate, but you're stuck? You want to make sure that's in there. Protected territory is important, but understand what that means. A protected territory in today's legal environment is only that the franchisor will not sell more franchises or open up a company-owned stores in the area that they have protected for you. It does not mean that your customer is prevented from going to another franchisee down the street, or it doesn't prevent a mobile franchise from going into someone's different territory. There's other issues on that and restrictions, but we'll talk about that. The other issue is negotiate multiple unit purchases up front, but don't pay for them. Okay, so take a look at that. The term, most terms are five-year renewable terms. Okay, so that's fair if it's called an evergreen renewal. In other words, unless there's something egregiously wrong, you're going to be renewed. But it does give the franchisor the right to ask you to upgrade or do certain things at that 5-year period. But that's good for you because there's always sloppy franchisees in the system, and you want to make sure that slop is eliminated. You don't want to go to the 10th year and it looks terrible and the customer's getting a bad impression because they're going to lump you into that. So 5 years is good. But you have to make sure there's no restrictions on renewals of any consequence. You have to be in compliance, but that's the idea. You can negotiate fees and payments. You can ask the initial franchise fee to be waived, or maybe it's the royalty to be offset for a moratorium for a certain number of months. You have the right to negotiate these fees. How about the fee of renewal fee? Well, let's get rid of that, okay? So read through the FDD and understand what that is. What pre-opening marketing are you going to help me with? Well, hey, it's our business together, isn't it? You're my partner, right? So how much money are you going to put into my pre-opening marketing, and how much am I supposed to put in? Training, I want more training you're offering, and I want to bring my 4 people on my staff. Well, that's easy for the franchise, we'd probably say yes. How about restrictions on marketing? Am I allowed to operate in another area, or is there some restrictions on what I can do? Can I handle the other areas first and then have the first right of refusal to buy them? So talk about that. Personal guarantee, well, I don't want to sign a personal guarantee past the first year, or whatever that thing is, so you need to negotiate that. A lot of franchisors lease the premises for you, and then you sublease it from them. You have to find out, are you paying them more money as a premium on that, or where are you at with it? And so you look at those issues. Now, there's other ones in here, like lease guarantee and what kind of central services. You know, will you answer my phone for me, franchisor, for the first couple months for free? Many things. I do want to just quickly hit online sales. You want to make sure if the franchisor does not compete with you. If they're selling stuff from their own website, and the person is originating from your zip code in your protected territory, you want to share those profits. So, I can't cover this in just a few minutes, but do you see how many negotiation points there really are? So the franchise agreement is negotiable. Okay? Now, franchise performance, again, you can read this over, but the idea is you're looking at this, if you're buying a franchise, you have not just a legal obligation, but a moral and ethical obligation to the franchisor, and in fact, the rest of the franchisees, and your customer, and your community, and maybe your investor, even if it's your father-in-law. Okay? You have to make sure that you're operating your business correctly, and you're going to follow the systems. Okay? And you're only required to do the minimum requirements from a legal perspective, but that's not good enough, guys. Okay? So they really have to understand I want to do this. And usually what happens to ensure performance, there's a minimum royalty. Even though that's negotiable, a franchisee is usually responsible to pay a minimum fee whether they sell something or they don't. Okay, now, this is critical. We only have a few minutes to go over this, but I want you to look at this. What's happening is the franchisor should take over the responsibility of these 3 things. One is franchisor pre-qualification. Is there banks or financing companies that have looked at the franchisor and said, yes, you're a great company, we're going to finance your franchisees. The franchisor has to take the first step in this area in order to make this work. Franchisee pre-qualification is obvious. There's no sense of a franchisor selling you a franchise if you can't get your financing. So you want to make sure that it meets the bank or SBA parameters, and you need to get that information from your franchisor, not later on in the program. And then loan packaging is very simple. The franchisor, once you work your business plan out, and by the way, the franchise doesn't give you a business plan and marketing plan, walk out the door, because it should be an obligation, even though it's not a legal obligation. Every franchisor should do that. Now, what you're really looking for is what document am I going to take to the bank, and how are you going to help me package up my look of my credit and my experience and what you're going to do and get me that financing. Okay? If not, give me the financing, please. Okay? Now, one of the ways, and I probably should have put this on this slide, and it's kind of between the two. What if a franchisor guaranteed financing for its franchisees and co-signed the loan? Do you think that they make a better selection? Of course they would. And because they're the partner and they have more financial qualifications, they should do that. It does put some contingent liability on them, but they should be able to handle this. Okay, so we might call that in preventing franchisee defection. If your franchisor is also your financer, it's a lot less likely you're going to defect. Okay, now what does this really mean? Okay, if you don't take anything else away from today's information, please take this away. Okay, post-royalty profit. Okay, a franchisee has the right, okay, to earn a profit after all expenses, and it should be a part of the franchise process. However the franchisor is going to do that, it should be set so that the economies of scale, the lower marketing costs, whatever it may be, is designed to help the franchisee. Now, what does this really mean for defection? Well, if the franchisee sees the royalty as a cost, in other words, oh my God, I got to pay this guy 4%, 7%, 10%, I'm not getting anything for it, you're going to have disgruntled franchisees. The franchisee says, I gladly pay my 7% because I save way more than that in marketing, in purchasing my goods. I'm making way more money by paying them. They're helping me, okay? So look at that. Support. What am I getting for my 7% or 5%? And do I have a lifestyle, or am I working around the clock and the franchise is getting rich and I'm just working, okay? And then what's the real brand value? Is the franchisor building brand value throughout their campaigns and throughout the area or region, country, however big the franchise is? So you want to prevent defection of franchisees, because what does that do to the value of your franchise if everybody's selling their franchises? You're always going to have one or two. I'm talking about kind of a mass defection. I'm not going to renew, okay? Now, we're almost, this is the part I love. This is the part where I really want you to understand this. We're coming to the close of what we're talking about today, but this is so important. And that is this, okay? We just talked about this. The obligation to pay franchisor royalties is actually a benefit. Guys, this is a 180-degree turnaround from what is normally thought of, right? And that's why I'm talking about it twice, okay? So here it is. It should be a benefit to the franchisee. That is best practices. Now, specialized assistance and support. A franchisor is a much better position to operate a central calling facility. So answer your phone for you, or close a sale, or provide advertising in the region. And most importantly, performance data. One of the reasons you want to join a franchise company is very simple. What is everybody else doing? Am I the only one doing X hundreds of thousands of dollars in gross and everybody else is doing twice that? Why is that? Okay? Or why am I the top performer? I want to share that with other franchisees. So it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all ships. But if you don't have the data, and particularly in real time, okay, you don't have anything. So you want to look for a franchisor that has an intranet that collects this data, processes this data, or analyzes it, and puts it into a readable report form that you can benefit from. Okay, check it out. Take a look at their intranet. Brand awareness. Okay, what are they doing? What's the system standard? How do they protect the brand? More importantly, you buy a franchise because you're expecting the franchise company to do research and development. Right now, sometimes the other franchisees do the research and development for you. You know, McDonald's Corporation didn't invent the Big Mac nor the Egg McMuffin. A franchisee did that. But here's what franchisees shouldn't expect. Franchisees give up all of their rights to intellectual property that they've developed. So they're really doing it to make more money for themselves and for the system. But really, McDonald's owns the Big Mac and the Egg McMuffin. However, they did give $1,500 in a plaque to the guy who invented it as a thank you gesture. And they do talk about him every year on Today's Show. So, if you think that's okay, that's good. But don't expect them to share the profits with you. But the idea is this. You want that collective mind of all those franchisees working together to come up with a better idea to how to make the system more efficient, more profitable, better for the customer. All those parameters, you want that to happen for you. And you don't have time to do research and development. You are working. Okay? And if you do that, you invent the Egg McMuffin, fantastic, contribute it to the company. Okay? Now, we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to go over it again. Okay, so here it is. Financing assistance. What do I think about a franchise company that actually does introduction to financial sources, guarantees my loan, or provides the franchising fees or other costs? They actually give me direct financing. Now, I don't necessarily expect them to finance the building of your building, but they can finance your initial franchise fee or other things, or training or whatever. So the idea is, let's look for a franchise to do your own financing, your own guarantees, or get you through the SBA or other private lenders. Remember, the SBA doesn't lend any money. The SBA guarantees money through private lenders. Most banks do not do that. Okay? There are specialized banks that are SBA lenders. You need to find them, and the franchisor should have already found them for you and had their system approved. And by the way, the franchise company needs to be listed on the SBA registry, sbaregistry.com. And that will save a lot of time because the SBA actually looks at the FDD and makes sure the franchisor is approved. Now, remember, I was talking about in my book, 400 questions. We're only looking at a few here, some of the most important ones, but there's a big information gap, so you really have to be aware of this. But I'm trying to bring you up to speed on where we need to be. So, the franchise organization, and I consider organizational excellence the #1 thing we're talking about today. That's the only way to judge a franchise. So you can judge them in 12 areas, okay, and here they are. What's the organizational performance? Have they developed a corporate culture? Like you've heard Starbucks and some companies that develop, Google is a perfect example, a great corporate culture where people want to work there, they win the awards, they do what's right. What is the staff advancement possibilities? Both levels, franchisee and franchisor. How's their leadership? Is there a clear leader? Is the guy or gal charismatic? Are they really going to make this thing work? What is the ethics behavior? Do they have an ethics policy? What's going on there? What is the environmental and social impact? Okay, why is environmental impact important? Are they chopping down trees in the Amazon to get your stuff done and everybody hates them? Okay. What's their societal impact? You ever see anybody protest the Walmart coming to town? You rarely see them protest the McDonald's coming to town. Okay, think about that for a second. What's the societal impact on what they're doing? What is the customer satisfaction and what is their relationship with the customer? Is there feedback loops? Is, what's going on? Remember, this is just high-level stuff right now. We have to get into this. What is the franchisee satisfaction? There's actually companies out there that rate franchisee satisfaction even if you never did the interviews yourself, but again, as a franchise buyer. What product improvements are they making? Do they have a performance improvement program? And this should be continuous product and service improvement all the time, okay? What is the quality assurance issues? Do they have a policy on that? Are they what's their refund policy, So you have to look at that. And let me see the last organizational excellence audit, okay? They should be looking at, where's my technology at? Am I still answering a rotary phone or do I have everything connected? So you want to look at those things. Again, this is very, very high level, but it gives you an idea that there are places to look at the areas that the franchisor has to be thinking about when they create organizational excellence. Now, I don't know that I have this on a slide, but what you're really looking at is, does the franchisor comply with the Malcolm Baldrige Performance Excellence Standards? You can look that up, baldrige.gov. ISO 9000 if they're selling a product, and maybe Six Sigma, which was originally invented for a quality control from Motorola. The idea is if you're going to go up in the space shuttle and it was built by the lowest bidder, you want to make sure that person has quality control programs in place? Okay, yeah, you do. Okay, so, and that applies whether you go to a hospital or whatever. So you want to look at that area. So the next thing is the company involved in cause marketing? And you're going to see the next slide is community involvement. Okay, what does that mean? And also, does it align with your thinking? Okay, so if they're supporting cancer research or they're supporting Alzheimer's, whatever it is that in line with what you want to do? And are you part of that? Or is the company just kind of paying lip service to it? Or are they really involved? And why is this important? Because if the company and you are required to contribute to this, and the customer is involved, the customer is way more likely to buy a product from a company that's involved in cause marketing than a company that is not. So you want to find out, are they involved? And if they're not involved, can you be involved? And that leads us into community involvement, okay? Is your franchisor asking you to become involved in the community? Are they involved? What are they going to provide? Are they providing leadership, funding, personnel? What is it? But what you want to do as a franchise, you are a local business person operating an independent business, even though it's a franchise, it's your business. You need to be involved in the community. How does the franchisor support that, and do you support that, right? Okay, and we're kind of coming up to the end here, and that is, what are the system success factors, okay? It's very, everybody says, I want to be first to market. I want to pioneer a product, okay? That is not necessarily what you need to do. You don't have to be first to market in order to make a successful franchise. In fact, many of the first to markets fail as pioneers. You want that sustainable company that's already past the early adopters, okay? They're already past the influencers, and they have a demand in that marketplace. Keep building them because I want this in my community. So the absolute thing, the best thing is, I have to go 2 communities over to get my Chick-fil-A sandwich. Please open one over here, and guess what? They will be doing it. Okay, so that's the concept, and how we find out is obviously through social media and other factors. Now, with this said, okay, I want to thank you for listening to this today and understanding that there's much more to what the franchisor's responsibility is to their franchisees, and much more franchisees or prospective franchisees' responsibility to themselves in selecting a great business and a great franchisor. And there really, really is a formula for this. And, I support that. And you'll find out more about that in my new book, The Insider's Guide to Franchising. Thank you so much for listening today. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to take them.